On the dawn of January 1st, 1843, in Natchez, Mississippi, 12 plantation owners were found dead in their own homes after a luxurious New Year's feast. All died in agony, vomiting blood, their insides liquefied. The investigation revealed oleander poison, perfectly dosed, administered by the same enslaved cook who prepared the feast at all 12 plantations. Her name was Jane, and she had planned this for 3 years. But to understand why Jane poisoned 12 of the wealthiest men in Mississippi, we must go back. Back to a time when she still had something to lose. Back to when she still believed in mercy. Summer of 1839, Natchez, Mississippi, the beating heart of the Cotton Kingdom. Cotton was king, and Natchez was its throne room. The wealthiest city per capita in the entire United States. Mansions lined the bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, each one a monument to wealth built on the backs of enslaved labor. 3,000 souls worked the surrounding plantations, their sweat transforming into white gold that filled the coffers of 12 families who controlled everything. At the center of this world stood Riverside Plantation, owned by Master Thomas Whitfield III, 5,000 acres of prime cotton land, 230 enslaved people, and one exceptional cook. Her name was Jane, 34 years old, born in Virginia, brought to Mississippi at 15 after being sold away from her mother. She never saw her mother again. That kind of loss carves something permanent into a person's soul, a hollow space that could never be filled, only covered over, like a wound that scars but never quite heals. Jane was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Years of labor had hardened her body, weathered her hands, but her eyes held something unusual for an enslaved woman: intelligence, sharp, observing, cataloging intelligence that missed nothing. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were chosen carefully, each one weighed and measured. She worked in the big house kitchen, a position of relative privilege in the brutal hierarchy of slavery. Field hands envied house slaves. House slaves had better food, better clothes, rarely felt the whip. But privilege was always relative. You were still property, still chattel, still less than human in the eyes of the law and the men who owned you. Jane's specialty was cooking, not just adequate cooking, but exceptional cooking. She had learned from her grandmother in Virginia, a Yoruba woman who had survived the Middle Passage and carried with her the knowledge of African herbs, spices, and cooking techniques that transformed ordinary ingredients into extraordinary meals. Master Whitfield recognized her talent immediately. He began loaning Jane to other plantation owners for special occasions, weddings, Christmas feasts, birthday celebrations. Jane would spend days in another plantation's kitchen, preparing elaborate meals that earned Whitfield both money and social capital. "Nobody cooks like Jane," Master Beauregard would say, wiping duck grease from his chin. "Whitfield, you must loan her for our harvest celebration." "For the right price, my friend," Whitfield would reply, smiling. For the right price. Jane became a fixture at gatherings of Natchez's elite. She knew all 12 families: the Whitfields, the Beauregards, the Hamptons, the Caldwells, the Pembertons, the Rutherfords, the Montgomerys, the Blackwoods, the Ashfords, the Kingstons, the Thorntons, the Waverleys. 12 families who controlled 3,000 lives. 12 men who gathered monthly to discuss cotton prices, slave discipline, and the inferiority of the African race over cigars and bourbon. Jane served them, smiled when expected, bowed her head, said yes, master, in the soft, deferential tone they required, and she observed everything. Master Whitfield was a calculated man, not particularly cruel by the standards of his time, which is to say he only whipped when he felt it necessary for discipline. He saw himself as a benevolent master, often saying, "I treat my people well. They eat, they have shelter, they have purpose." What more could they want? Freedom. They wanted freedom. But men like Whitfield never asked that question seriously. His wife, Mistress Constance, was cold in the way only Southern aristocrat women could be. She managed the house slaves with icy efficiency, dispensing punishments for minor infractions. A cracked plate might earn a slap. Burnt bread might mean no supper. She was not sadistic, merely indifferent to suffering that was not her own. The other 11 families operated similarly. Some were worse. Master Ashford was known to use the hot box, a metal container where disobedient slaves were locked under the Mississippi sun until they passed out from heat. Master Kingston had a fondness for the whipping post, believing that regular discipline keeps them docile. But they were not monsters in their own eyes. They attended church every Sunday. They quoted scripture to justify slavery. They genuinely believed in the natural order of white supremacy, that God himself had ordained their dominion over the black race. This was the world Jane navigated, a world where her humanity was denied as a matter of law, custom, and religious doctrine. Yet Jane had carved out something precious in this hell, something that made survival bearable. She had a family. Samuel was a blacksmith on the neighboring plantation, owned by Master Beauregard. 38 years old, powerfully built from years at the forge, with intelligent eyes and gentle hands despite his strength. They had met 7 years ago during a Christmas feast when both had been loaned to Master Hampton's plantation. Samuel had watched Jane work in the kitchen, mesmerized by her grace and competence. After the feast they had spoken briefly by the slave quarters, just 5 minutes, but it was enough. Over the years they found ways to see each other, stolen moments during errands, brief encounters when their masters socialized. Once, Samuel had carved her a small wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb. Jane kept it hidden in her dress pocket, touching it when she needed to remember that love could exist even here. They could not marry legally. Slaves could not marry. But they had their own ceremony, conducted by an elderly slave named Moses, who remembered rituals from Africa. They jumped the broom together under a full moon, with a dozen witnesses from the quarters. In their hearts, in their souls, they were married. And then came Grace, born in 1834, 8 years old in the summer of 1839, the only child Jane had carried to term after 3 miscarriages, a miracle baby. Her reason for surviving. Grace had Samuel's eyes and Jane's intelligence. Already at 8, she could identify every herb in Jane's basket. She helped in the kitchen, learning recipes, learning the old ways. At night, Jane would hold her and tell her stories of Africa, passed down from her grandmother. Stories of kingdoms and queens, of a time before chains. "Will I ever be free, Mama?" Grace would ask. Jane would stroke her hair and lie. "Yes, baby, one day, one day." She knew it was a lie. Children born to enslaved mothers were enslaved. The law was clear. Grace would live and die in chains unless something changed, unless somehow, impossibly, she could be freed. But Jane held on to hope. Master Whitfield had once mentioned that he might consider manumission for exceptional slaves in his old age. It was a distant dream, but Jane clung to it. Work hard, be indispensable. Make yourself valuable enough that freedom becomes possible. She did not know that hope was the cruelest torture of all. During this time, Jane's knowledge of herbs expanded beyond cooking. The same grandmother who taught her to prepare food had also taught her which plants healed and which plants killed. "Knowledge is power, child," her grandmother had whispered decades ago in Virginia, especially for those with no other power. Jane knew that elderberry bark stopped fever, that ginger root settled nausea, that willow bark dulled pain. She also knew that oleander caused vomiting and cardiac arrest, that foxglove in high doses stopped the heart, that water hemlock brought convulsions and death, that Jimson weed seeds caused delirium and respiratory failure. This knowledge she kept locked in her mind, never speaking of it. In the slave quarters there were whispers of root workers and conjure women who could cure or curse. Jane was not one of them publicly, but privately. Some came to her for remedies. A tea for childbirth pain, a poultice for infection. She helped when she could, asking nothing in return. But the knowledge of deadly plants remained theoretical, something known but never used. Not yet. If you're feeling the weight of Jane's world right now, the impossible position of loving someone in a system designed to destroy love, leave your like. This is a story that American history books tried to erase, but we remember. December 15th, 1839, the day everything changed. Jane was in the kitchen preparing supper when Master Whitfield entered, followed by a white man she had never seen before. Gaunt, predatory eyes, expensive suit, the smell of tobacco and cruelty. A slave trader. Jane's hands stopped moving. Every enslaved person knew that smell, that posture. Traders meant separation. Families torn apart, children sold away, husbands and wives scattered across states, never to see each other again. "Jane, finish up and send supper to the dining room," Whitfield said dismissively. She kept her head bowed. "Yes, master." But her heart was pounding. She moved to the window where she could hear their conversation drifting from Whitfield's study. "Hard times, Marcus," Whitfield was saying. "Cotton prices fell, and I made some unfortunate investments. Need to liquidate some assets." The trader's voice was cold, businesslike. "How many are you looking to sell?" 8, maybe 10. I'll keep the essential ones. Prime field hands, my blacksmith, my cook, obviously. But the excess, the children not yet productive, some of the older ones." Jane's blood turned to ice. Children fetch good prices in New Orleans," the trader said, "especially the light-skinned ones. Pretty mulatto girls. You can break them in young, train them for housework or—" He paused meaningfully. "Other services. Brothels pay premium." Whitfield chuckled. "Marcus, you old devil, whatever pays best." Jane's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the counter, forcing herself to remain upright. Not Grace. Please God, not Grace. She had to know. Had to see the list. That night, after the house was asleep, Jane did something she had never done before. She crept into Whitfield's study. Her hands shook as she lit a candle, praying the light wouldn't be seen. On his desk lay a ledger. She opened it. Her grandmother had taught her to read in secret, a dangerous and illegal skill for an enslaved person. But now that forbidden knowledge served her. The list: Old Moses, 65 years, $50 Eliza, 40 years lame foot, $100 Jacob, 12 years, $400 Grace, 8 years, $600. Jane's vision blurred. She read it again, hoping she had misunderstood. But the words remained. Grace, her baby, her reason for breathing. $600. That was what her daughter's life was worth to Master Whitfield, the price of a good horse. Jane's hands crumpled the paper before she realized what she was doing. She smoothed it out frantically, replaced it exactly as it had been, and fled the study. She ran to the slave quarters, to her cabin, where Grace slept peacefully on a thin mattress. Jane collapsed beside her, pulling her daughter into her arms, trying not to sob so loud she'd wake her. Grace stirred. "Mama? Shh, baby. Go back to sleep. You're shaking, Mama. I'm cold. Go back to sleep." But Jane did not sleep. She lay there, holding Grace, breathing in the smell of her hair, memorizing the weight of her small body, planning. She would beg, offer anything, everything. December 18th, 3 days before the trader would return. Jane approached Whitfield in his study. She had never initiated conversation before. Slaves did not approach masters uninvited. "Master Whitfield, sir, may I speak?" He looked up from his papers, annoyed. "What is it, Jane?" She dropped to her knees. "Please, master, please don't sell Grace. I'll do anything. I'll work every day without rest. I won't eat if you need to save money. I'll—" "Get up, Jane. This is unseemly. Please." Her voice broke. "She's my only child. Please. I'm begging you." Whitfield's face hardened. "You forget yourself. Grace is not your child. She's my property, and I will dispose of my property as I see fit. You should be grateful I'm keeping you." "Master, please, she's only 8 years old." "Enough!" He stood. "This conversation is over. Be grateful I don't whip you for impertinence." Jane remained on the floor, shaking. "What will happen to her?" Whitfield sighed, as if explaining something tedious to a child. "She'll go to a good home, probably New Orleans. They'll train her as a house servant. She'll have an easier life than breaking her back in cotton fields. Now get back to work." Jane knew what training in New Orleans meant for pretty mulatto girls. She knew the brothels, the abuse, the short, brutal lives. Grace would be 13 when they started using her. If she survived to 20, it would be a miracle. "I'll buy her freedom," Jane said desperately. "I'll work for you for free forever. Just let her stay." Whitfield laughed. Actually laughed. "With what money, Jane? You own nothing. You are nothing. Now get out before I lose my patience." Jane stood on shaking legs and walked out. That night she tried one more time. She went to Mistress Constance, thinking perhaps woman to woman, mother to mother, there might be mercy. "Mistress, please. I know it's not my place, but Grace is just a baby. Please ask Master Whitfield to reconsider." Constance looked at her coldly. "Jane, you're an excellent cook, but you must understand your place. Grace is not a baby. She's property." And honestly, selling her makes economic sense. She eats but produces nothing. In a few years, she'll start breeding, and that's just more mouths to feed. Master Whitfield is making a sound business decision. But she's my daughter. She is not your daughter in any legal sense. You birthed her, but she belongs to Master Whitfield, as do you. Now stop this foolishness." Jane left without another word. There would be no mercy, no humanity, no compassion. She had been a fool to hope. December 21st, 1839. The day of collection. The slave trader arrived at dawn with a wagon. 8 enslaved people were assembled in the yard, Grace among them. Jane held her daughter, trying to be strong, failing completely. Grace was crying, clinging to her, not understanding why this was happening. "Mama, don't let them take me. Mama, please. Baby, I can't." Jane's voice broke. "I can't stop them, but you're strong. You remember everything I taught you. You remember the stories. You remember you're a queen's daughter. I don't want to be strong. I want to stay with you." Samuel had been allowed to come from Master Beauregard's plantation. He stood beside them, tears streaming down his face, powerless. The trader approached. "Time to go. Chain them up." "No." Jane lunged forward, trying to reach Grace. Master Whitfield nodded to the overseer. "Control her." The overseer, a brutal man named Pike, grabbed Jane. She fought like a wild animal, screaming, biting, scratching. She managed to draw blood before Pike threw her to the ground. "You want to fight?" Pike pulled out his whip. "Then you'll learn." "Please," Samuel begged, stepping forward. "She's just—" Pike struck him across the face with a whip handle. Samuel fell. Pike turned back to Jane. 50 lashes. Let this be a lesson." They tied Jane to the whipping post in the yard, the same post where dozens had been punished before. The wood was stained dark with old blood. Grace was screaming, "Mama, no, please, I'll go quietly, don't hurt her." But the whip was already falling. The first strike tore through Jane's dress and split skin. The sound was like thunder. Pain exploded across her back. Grace's screams intensified. "Stop, please stop." The second strike crossed the first, creating an X of agony. Third, fourth, fifth. Jane tried not to scream. Tried to be strong for Grace. Failed. By the 20th lash, her back was a mass of torn flesh. Blood soaked through her dress, dripped onto the ground. By the 30th, she could barely breathe. By the 40th, consciousness was slipping. She heard Grace screaming her name, heard Samuel sobbing, heard Master Whitfield say calmly, "Proceed with loading." The 50th lash fell. Jane collapsed, held up only by the ropes binding her wrists. Her back was destroyed, rivers of blood, exposed muscle in places. Through fading consciousness, she saw them load Grace into the wagon, saw her daughter's face, contorted with terror and anguish, reaching for her. "Mama! Mama!" The wagon started moving. Grace's voice became distant, then disappeared. Then there was only pain and darkness. Jane woke 3 days later in her cabin. Someone had treated her back, wrapped it in bandages. The pain was indescribable. Every breath felt like knives. An elderly woman named Ruth sat beside her. "Easy, child, don't move too fast." "Grace?" Jane's voice was a rasp. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Gone, honey. They took her to New Orleans 3 days ago." Something inside Jane shattered completely. Not broke, shattered. Like a glass dropped from a great height, exploding into 1,000 pieces that could never be reassembled. She did not cry. Tears required something inside you that still felt. Jane felt nothing, an absolute void where her heart had been. "Samuel?" she whispered. "Back at Beauregard's plantation. He tried to visit. Master Whitfield forbid it." Jane nodded slowly, trying to process. Grace was gone, her baby, her light, her reason for enduring, gone, sold, by now in New Orleans, by now being evaluated by brothel owners, by now learning what her life would be. 8 years old. Jane turned her face to the wall. Ruth touched her shoulder gently. "You got to find a way to go on, child. Why?" The question hung in the air. Why go on? Why survive? Why breathe when breathing was agony and living was torture and hope was dead? Ruth had no answer. For 2 weeks, Jane recovered. The whip wounds healed into raised scars that would mark her for life, 50 lines of hatred carved into her skin. She returned to work in the kitchen. Master Whitfield acted as if nothing had happened. Mistress Constance commented that Jane seemed sullen and needed to adjust her attitude. Jane said nothing, did her work mechanically, perfect cooking, perfect service, perfect obedience. At night she lay in her cabin, staring at the ceiling, empty. Samuel managed to visit once. He held her, and they cried together. "We'll find her," he promised. "Somehow. We'll buy her back. We'll—" "With what?" Jane's voice was flat. "We own nothing. We are nothing. Don't say that. It's what Master Whitfield said." And he was right. Samuel pulled back, looking at her with concern. "Jane, you're scaring me. What are you thinking?" She met his eyes. For the first time since Grace was taken, there was something there. Not sadness, not grief, rage, cold, calculated, patient rage. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that men who can do this and face no consequences are not men. They're demons, and demons should die." Samuel's eyes widened. "Jane, don't talk like that. If anyone hears, no one will hear, because I will be patient. I will smile. I will serve. And when the time is right," she paused, "they will pay. Every single one of them. You can't mean—" "I mean exactly what I'm saying. 12 men were at that Christmas party. 12 men laughed when Master Whitfield announced he'd sold my daughter for $800. 12 men applauded his business sense. 12 men will die screaming." Samuel grabbed her shoulders. "Jane, listen to yourself. You can't kill 12 white men. They'll hang you. They'll burn you alive." "Then I'll die free," Jane said calmly, "because right now I'm already dead. Grace was the only thing keeping me alive. They took her, so there's nothing left to lose, and men with nothing to lose are the most dangerous of all." Samuel stared at her, seeing something in her eyes that terrified him. This was not his wife. This was something else. Something forged in unbearable pain and unquenchable fury. "How?" he whispered. Jane smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator. "Poison," she said. "I'm going to poison every single one of them. And they'll never see it coming." Pause for a moment. "What would you do if you were Jane? If the law offered you no protection? If your child was taken and sold into sexual slavery? If the men responsible faced no consequences? Leave your comment. And if you're feeling that this revenge is justified, leave your like." January 1840. The planning began. Jane had 3 advantages. First, her position. As Whitfield's loaned cook, she had access to all 12 families. They trusted her implicitly. She was just a slave, after all, invisible, useful, harmless. Second, her knowledge. The herbs her grandmother taught her, the plants that killed. She knew dosages, symptoms, timing. Third, her patience. Jane was not impulsive. She would not rush. She would wait, plan, prepare. And when the moment was perfect, she would strike. The first step was study. Jane began keeping a mental ledger of each family, their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. Master Whitfield rose at 7. Coffee on the east porch. Inspection of fields at 9. Afternoon nap at 3. Bourbon in his study at 9 p.m. alone. Slept in separate room from Constance due to his snoring. Diabetic. Required specific diet. Master Beauregard, early riser, 4 a.m. Rode plantation boundaries daily. Heavy drinker. Violent temper. Wife lived in fear. 3 children, all grown and managing their own plantations. Master Hampton, 65 years old. Wealthy bachelor, never married. Rumors about young male slaves. Cruel in casual ways. Hypochondriac, constantly taking medicines. Master Caldwell, 52. Thin, nervous disposition. Deeply religious. Quoted scripture constantly to justify slavery. Wife was meek. 4 daughters, all married to other plantation owners. She catalogued all 12, their schedules, their preferences, their health issues. Information was power. The second step was collection. Jane had permission to gather herbs for cooking. She would disappear into the woods and swamps surrounding the plantations, basket in hand, returning with mint, sage, rosemary for kitchen use. But she also gathered other plants. Oleander grew wild along the property edges, beautiful pink flowers, deadly in every part. Leaves, flowers, stems, roots. Just a few leaves, ground into powder, could kill a man. Foxglove grew in shaded areas. Purple, bell-shaped flowers contained digitalis, In small doses, it treated heart conditions. In larger doses, it stopped the heart entirely. Water hemlock near streams, white flowers, looked similar to edible plants, caused violent convulsions and death within hours. Jimson weed in fields, large white flowers, seeds caused delirium and respiratory failure. Jane collected them all, carefully, one plant at a time, never enough to be noticed, over months, over years. She dried them in hidden locations, ground them into powder using a mortar and pestle stolen from the big house medical supplies, stored the powder in small vials inside a false bottom she carved into her herb basket. The third step was testing. Jane could not simply guess at dosages. She needed precision, needed to know exactly how much would kill, how quickly, what symptoms would appear. She started with rats. The plantation had plenty. She would trap them, feed them measured amounts of powder mixed with food, observe. Too little, sickness, recovery. Too much, instant death. Too suspicious. Just right, death in 4 to 6 hours, symptoms appearing gradually. She moved on to chickens, declared a few sick and offered to dispose of them, fed them poisoned grain, observed, finally a piglet. Pigs were physiologically similar to humans. She needed to know the lethal dose for a creature weighing 150 pounds. She accidentally poisoned one during a feeding. Master Whitfield was annoyed but not suspicious. These things happen. Jane took notes, mental notes, everything committed to memory. By 1841, she knew exactly how much oleander powder would kill a full-grown man of specific weight. Knew it would take 4 hours for symptoms to manifest, 6 to 8 hours for death, painful, agonizing, vomiting, convulsions, burning sensation in the throat, cardiac arrest, perfect. The fourth step was opportunity. She needed all 12 together. A feast, where she would cook for all of them, where she could control every aspect of food preparation. Such opportunities came rarely. The 12 families gathered quarterly for social events, but each family hosted their own feasts, employed their own cooks, except for special occasions. Weddings, Christmas, New Year. Jane waited, listened, learned. In December 1841, during a Christmas gathering, she overheard Master Whitfield speaking with Master Beauregard. Next year's New Year feast should be special. Cotton prices are at record highs. We should celebrate properly. Beauregard agreed. Rotating host this year was Charleston's idea, but honestly, it's cumbersome. What if we all hosted simultaneously? Each family their own feast, but coordinated. Start at the same time. Toast together at midnight. Whitfield nodded. Excellent idea. And we'll need proper food. I'll loan Jane to cook for all 12 houses. She's the best cook in Mississippi. No one compares. Jane, serving drinks nearby, kept her face neutral. Inside, her heart raced. This was it. The opportunity. 12 families. 12 houses. Same night, all trusting her to cook. She had 1 year to finalize preparations. The fifth step was psychological preparation. Jane visited Grace's empty sleeping spot every night, the thin mattress where her daughter had slept. She would kneel there, touching the worn fabric, and repeat her oath. 12 men laughed. 12 men will scream. She rehearsed every step in her mind, thousands of times, waking at midnight, walking through each plantation, entering each kitchen, preparing each meal, adding poison, timing, dosage, escape. She visualized their faces as they ate, as symptoms started, as they realized what was happening, as they died. She felt no pity, no remorse, no hesitation. They had taken everything. Now she would take their lives. Samuel tried to talk her out of it multiple times. Jane, please, this will end with you dead, hanged, burned, please. Then I'll die, she said calmly. But they die first. What about us? What about what we have? Jane looked at him with empty eyes. What do we have, Samuel? We can't marry legally. Our children are property. They can sell us apart tomorrow. We have nothing. We are nothing. At least if I do this, I'll have revenge. That's something. Samuel finally stopped trying to dissuade her. He couldn't watch her go through with it, but he couldn't stop her either. In secret, he helped. He forged her travel papers for after the poisoning. Papers declaring her a freed woman traveling north. They wouldn't hold up to close scrutiny, but they might buy time. He mapped escape routes, safe houses, underground railroad contacts, all the information gathered from whispered conversations in the slave quarters, from traveling preachers who were secretly abolitionists. If you survive this, he told her, run north. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to Canada. Come with me, Jane said. Samuel shook his head. I can't. Master Beauregard would hunt us both, but you, alone, might make it, especially after all 12 masters are dead. There will be chaos. Use it. They held each other, both knowing this might be the last time. I love you, Samuel said. I love you, Jane replied. And when I'm free, I'll find Grace. Somehow, I'll buy her freedom. It was a fantasy. They both knew it, but they needed something to believe in. December 31st, 1842, the day of reckoning. Jane woke at 4 a.m., had not really slept, just laid there staring at darkness, breathing, waiting. Today was the day. She rose, washed, dressed in her plain work dress, checked her herb basket. The false bottom contained 12 small vials, each filled with finely ground oleander powder, lethal dose calculated by body weight for each master. Master Whitfield, 210 pounds, 3 grams. Master Beauregard, 190 pounds, 2.8 grams. Master Hampton, 170 pounds, 2.5 grams, and so on. Jane had weighed ingredients precisely, used a small scale stolen from the medical kit. Each vial was exact, no margin for error. She tucked the basket under her arm and walked to the big house kitchen. Master Whitfield was already awake, reviewing preparation plans. Jane, you'll start at the Beauregard plantation at noon, then Hampton, Caldwell, Pemberton, and so on. You'll have help at each house, but you're in charge of main courses. Everything must be perfect. Yes, Master, it will be perfect. Whitfield smiled. Good. This feast will be legendary, the night we celebrated the greatest prosperity Mississippi has ever known. Yes, Master, legendary. He didn't hear the edge in her voice, didn't see the cold fury in her eyes. He saw a slave, obedient, useful, harmless. 12 hours until execution, noon, Beauregard plantation. Jane arrived with her basket and began preparations. The kitchen staff, 2 enslaved women named Martha and Sue, greeted her respectfully. Jane was known, respected, the best cook in Mississippi. What are we making, Miss Jane? Martha asked. Roasted duck with oyster stuffing, glazed ham, sweet potato casserole, cornbread, collard greens, pecan pie, and a special bourbon sauce for dessert. Sounds delicious. Jane smiled. It will be unforgettable. She worked methodically, giving instructions, delegating tasks, but the main dishes, the ones served directly to the masters and their wives, those she prepared personally. The stuffing, mixed breadcrumbs, oysters, herbs, and 1 vial of oleander powder stirred in. The powder was tasteless, odorless in small amounts, dissolved perfectly. The glazed ham, basted with honey, butter, and poison. The bourbon sauce, reduced alcohol, brown sugar, and death. Everything else was clean. The side dishes served to children and guests were safe. Jane was not a monster. She targeted 12 men, only 12. By 4 p.m., the feast was ready. Beauregard and his wife sat down to eat. Jane, this smells extraordinary, Beauregard said, cutting into the duck. Thank you, Master. He took a bite, chewed, swallowed. Delicious. Best duck I've ever had, his wife agreed. You've outdone yourself, Jane. Jane bowed her head. I live to serve, Master. She watched them eat, watched the poison enter their bodies, watched them smile and compliment and consume their own deaths. 4 hours until symptoms. She had to keep moving. 1 p.m., Hampton Plantation. Same process, same precision. Roasted pork loin with rosemary, poisoned. Apple pie with cinnamon, poisoned. Master Hampton, the old bachelor, ate alone in his grand dining room, served by 2 young male slaves he kept close, for reasons everyone knew but no one spoke of. Jane, you're a treasure, he said, mouthful of pork. Whitfield is lucky to own you. Yes, Master. 2 p.m., Caldwell Plantation, the religious man, the one who quoted scripture, who said slavery was ordained by God. Jane prepared fried chicken, biscuits and gravy, peach cobbler, all poisoned. Caldwell said grace before eating, a long, elaborate prayer thanking God for the prosperity of the South, for the natural order of white supremacy, for the blessing of slavery that brought civilization to the savage African race. Jane stood with head bowed, listening. Amen, Caldwell finished. Amen, Jane echoed. He ate, praised the food, complimented her skill. She smiled and thought, you'll be dead by midnight. 3 p.m. Pemberton Plantation, 4 p.m. Rutherford Plantation, 5 p.m. Montgomery Plantation, 6 p.m. Blackwood Plantation, 7 p.m. Ashford Plantation, 8 p.m. Kingston Plantation, 9 p.m. Thornton Plantation, 10 p.m. Waverley Plantation, 11 p.m. Back to Whitfield Plantation. The final feast. Jane was exhausted. She had cooked for 12 hours straight, traveled between 12 plantations, prepared 12 feasts, administered 12 doses of death. Her hands ached, her feet throbbed. Her back, scarred from the whipping, burned with pain, but she was almost finished. Master Whitfield's feast was the grandest. He had invited neighbors, business associates, his grown sons from Charleston, 30 people in total. But only Whitfield and Constance would receive the poisoned dishes. Jane prepared her most elaborate meal: venison roast, Duchess potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, chocolate torte. The hollandaise sauce, poisoned. The chocolate torte, poisoned. Whitfield sat at the head of the table, Constance beside him, guests filling every chair, laughter, conversation, cigars, wine flowing freely. Jane served each course personally. Whitfield raised his glass. To 1843, to prosperity, to the Southern way of life. Hear, hear, the guests echoed. Jane stood in the corner, hands folded, face neutral. Whitfield cut into the venison, took a bite. Jane, this is exceptional, truly exceptional. Thank you, Master. Constance dabbed her lips with a napkin. The hollandaise is perfect. Jane, you've earned a rest tomorrow. Take the day. You're very kind, mistress. Tomorrow, as if there would be a tomorrow, as if Jane would be here. Midnight approached. The guests counted down. 10, 9, 8. Jane watched. 7, 6, 5. 12 men had eaten poison between 2 and 8 hours ago. Symptoms would be starting soon. 4, 3, 2. Jane's heart was calm. No fear, no doubt, only cold satisfaction. 1. Happy New Year. Cheers, embraces, kisses, more wine. Jane slipped out of the dining room, walked through the kitchen, grabbed a small bag she had hidden earlier containing a change of clothes, Samuel's forged papers, a little food. She walked out the back door of the big house. 12:30 a.m., January 1st, 1843. Jane walked across the grounds, past the slave quarters, into the darkness beyond. Behind her, the feast continued. Laughter and music. None of them knew, none of them suspected, none of them would survive the night. Jane did not run. She walked calmly, steadily, through cotton fields, toward the tree line, toward the woods where Samuel waited with a horse. He was there, as promised. It's done, he whispered. It's done. Samuel embraced her, held her tight. God have mercy on your soul. I don't want mercy, Jane said. I want justice, and justice is coming. She mounted the horse. Samuel handed her the reins. Go, he said. North, don't stop. I'll send word if it's safe. I love you. I love you. Now go. Jane kicked the horse into motion, disappeared into darkness. Behind her, in 12 plantation houses across Natchez, symptoms were beginning. 2 a.m., Beauregard Plantation. Master Beauregard woke suddenly. Nausea, intense, overwhelming. He stumbled from bed, made it to the chamber pot, vomited violently. Blood mixed with bile. His wife woke. Thomas? What's wrong? Don't know, he gasped. Food poisoning, maybe. Another wave of nausea. More blood. I'll fetch the doctor, his wife said, alarmed. But before she could dress, she felt it too. The same nausea, the same burning in her throat. She vomited. Blood. Terror gripped them both. 2:15 a.m., Hampton Plantation. Master Hampton convulsed in his bed, heart racing, chest pain, couldn't breathe. His enslaved servants found him clawing at his nightshirt, face purple, veins bulging. Master, master. But Hampton couldn't respond. His heart was failing, digitalis-induced cardiac arrest. He died at 2:20 a.m., eyes open, face frozen in terror. 2:30 a.m., Caldwell Plantation, the religious man, the scripture quoter. Caldwell vomited so violently he tore his esophagus. Blood poured from his mouth. His wife screamed for help. Pray, Caldwell gasped. Pray for me. But prayer could not stop Oleander Poison. His heart arrhythmia grew worse, pulse erratic, then slowing, then stopping. He died at 2:45 a.m. Last words, God, why? Across Natchez the same horror unfolded. 12 masters, 12 wives who had shared the poisoned dishes, 24 people total, all experiencing the same symptoms: violent vomiting, blood, burning throat, chest pain, convulsions, cardiac arrest. Doctors were summoned, but they were baffled. Food poisoning didn't kill this quickly, didn't cause these symptoms. And why so many people in different locations? By 3 a.m., 4 were dead. By 4 a.m., 8. By 5 a.m., 12. By 6 a.m., all 24. The wives had not been Jane's targets, but they had eaten the same food as their husbands. Collateral damage. Jane had not intended it, but she felt no remorse. They had lived lives of luxury built on enslaved labor. They had looked the other way while their husbands brutalized human beings. Their deaths were a side effect, regrettable but not mourned. Dawn, January 1st, 1843. Natchez woke to horror. Servants found bodies, families screaming, chaos in 12 households simultaneously. The news spread like wildfire. Dead, all dead, 12 plantation owners, same night, poison. Panic seized the town. Sheriff William Johnson assembled deputies. Doctors examined bodies. The evidence was clear. Oleander poisoning. All of them. Same method, same timing. Who had access? Johnson demanded. The answer came quickly, too quickly. Jane, Whitfield's cook. She prepared food at all 12 plantations yesterday. Where is she? They searched Whitfield Plantation. Jane's cabin was empty, her few possessions gone. She ran, Johnson said grimly. She knew what she did. Within an hour, wanted posters were printed. $10,000 reward, wanted dead or alive Jane, fugitive slave murderess of 24 white citizens, approximately 34 years old. 5 feet 4 inches, dark complexion, scarred back, last seen wearing plain brown dress, extremely dangerous. Known poisoner. Contact Sheriff Johnson, Natchez, Mississippi, $10,000. A fortune. Every slave catcher, bounty hunter, and poor white man in the South would be hunting her. Jane was 40 miles away by dawn. Riding hard. Changing horses at a safe house, operated by Underground Railroad conductors. A Quaker family. The Coffins. The other one from Natchez, Levi Coffin said quietly. News travels fast. They deserved it, Jane said, no emotion in her voice. We don't judge thee. We help all who flee bondage. But thee must know, the hunt will be unprecedented. 24 white people dead. They will not rest until thee are caught. Then I won't be caught. Levi's wife, Catherine, provided fresh clothes. Dark trousers, a man's shirt, a hat to hide Jane's hair. Travel as a man. Thee will be safer. Jane cut her hair short with scissors, looked at herself in a mirror, barely recognized the face staring back. She had been Jane the cook, Jane the mother, Jane the wife. Now she was Jane the poisoner, Jane the murderer, Jane the fugitive, and she felt nothing about it except cold satisfaction. Rest here today, Levi said. Travel tonight. We'll provide a map to the next station. Ohio River is 3 weeks north if thee moves fast. Jane nodded. Thank you. Does thee have family? Anyone who might be punished in thy place? Samuel. Jane's heart clenched. My husband. Samuel, blacksmith at Beauregard Plantation. Levi's face darkened. Beauregard is dead. His plantation will be chaos. There may be retaliation against all slaves there. We can try to get word, help him escape. Please, Jane whispered, first emotion she'd shown. Please help him. We will try. Back in Natchez, the retaliation began. Martial law declared. All enslaved people confined to quarters. Anyone found outside would be shot on sight. Public meetings held, plantation owners gathering, terrified, furious. This is what happens when we're too lenient, one shouted. We must make an example, another demanded. Hang 10 slaves for every white person killed. Cooler heads tried to prevail. We can't kill 240 slaves. That's economic destruction. Then 20. Public executions. Show them what happens when they rebel. 20 enslaved people were selected at random from the 12 plantations. Old, young, men, women, innocent of any crime except sharing skin color with Jane. They were hanged in the town square. one by one, over 2 days, while every enslaved person in the county was forced to watch. The message was clear: this is what happens when one of you kills us. But the message received was different. One woman killed 12 masters and escaped. It can be done. Samuel was among those arrested, interrogated, tortured. Where is your wife? I don't know. Liar. They whipped him, burned him with hot irons, broke his fingers one by one. I don't know, and it was true. Jane hadn't told him her exact route. Safer that way. After 3 days, they gave up. Samuel was too valuable as a blacksmith to kill, but they sold him. Deep south, to a plantation in the Mississippi Delta where conditions were worse, where the average enslaved person survived 7 years before dying of exhaustion, disease, or violence. Samuel never saw Jane again. Died in 1850, but before he died, he told his story to others in the quarters. The story of Jane, the woman who poisoned 12 masters and escaped. The story spread, whispered in slave quarters across the South, embellished, changed, but the core remained. 1 woman, 12 deaths, justice. Jane traveled for 3 months. Close calls nearly every week. In Tennessee, bloodhounds picked up her scent. She waded through a freezing river for 2 miles, nearly died of hypothermia, but lost them. In Kentucky, a bounty hunter recognized her at a market. She stabbed him with a kitchen knife, ran, hid in a cemetery for 2 days. In southern Ohio, slave catchers raided the safe house where she was staying. Jane escaped through a cellar tunnel, but the family hiding her was arrested. She carried that guilt. Finally, in April 1843, she crossed the Ohio River into free territory, then continued north, through Ohio, into Michigan, across into Canada, Windsor, a free city where slavery had no power. Jane walked across the bridge connecting Detroit to Windsor. With each step, chains fell away, legal chains, psychological chains. On Canadian soil, she stopped, knelt, kissed the ground. I'm free, she whispered. I'm actually free. For the first time in 34 years, Jane owned herself. She settled in Toronto under a new name, Mary Freeman, found work as a cook. Ironically, her skills were always in demand. She lived modestly, quietly, never married again, never had more children. But she never forgot grace. Every penny she earned, she saved. For 7 years she saved, and in 1850 she had enough. She hired a detective, a white man who worked with abolitionists, gave him a description of Grace, the name of the trader, the approximate date of sale. Find her, Jane said. Whatever it costs, find her. 3 months later he returned. Jane knew from his face. I'm sorry, he said. She died in 1844. Disease. Yellow fever outbreak in New Orleans. She was 13. Jane sat down slowly. The floor seemed to drop away. Are you certain? Death certificate, buried in Potter's Field. I'm sorry. Jane nodded. Couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Grace was dead, had died 9 years ago while Jane was running. While Jane was free, Grace had died in slavery, in a brothel, at 13 years old. All of it. The poison, the escape, the hope. All of it for nothing. No, not nothing. 12 men died, 12 demons who created a system that destroyed Grace. They died. That mattered. It had to matter. Jane lived until 1887, 44 years in freedom. She never told her story publicly, too dangerous. Even in Canada, there were those who would see her hanged for what she did. But in private, in trusted circles, she spoke, and she wrote. In 1885, 2 years before her death, Jane wrote her story in a small leather journal, every detail, every name, every moment. She gave it to a young black journalist named William Still, Jr., son of the famous Underground Railroad conductor. Publish this after I'm dead, she told him. Let people know what slavery was, what it made us become, what we had to do to survive. Still promised. But the journal disappeared, lost in a fire in 1891. Most people assumed Jane's story was legend, a myth, an exaggeration, until 1924. A historian named Carter Woodson, researching slave narratives, found records. Death certificates from Natchez, January 1843. 24 people dead in one night, all by poison, all traced to an enslaved cook named Jane. Wanted posters, yellowed and brittle. sheriff's reports, testimony from the trials of innocent slaves executed in retaliation. It was real. All of it was real. Woodson published his findings in the Journal of Negro History. The article was controversial. Some said it glorified murder. Others said it told a necessary truth. The white establishment tried to suppress it. Failed. The story spread. Jane became a symbol of resistance, of the lengths people will go when pushed beyond endurance, of the violence inherent in slavery that eventually turned back on slaveholders. Today, Jane's story remains contentious. Was she a murderer? Legally, yes. Was she a monster? That depends on your perspective. She killed 24 people, including women who, while complicit in slavery, had not directly harmed her. But she lived in a system that gave her no legal recourse, no protection, no humanity. Her daughter was sold to sexual slavery at 8 years old. She was whipped unconscious for objecting. 12 men laughed about it. What was she supposed to do? Forgive? Accept? Submit? She chose violence, the only power available to the powerless. History doesn't judge Jane as much as it reflects on the system that created her. Slavery was not a benign institution. It was not paternalistic kindness. It was systematic brutalization that occasionally provoked brutal response. Jane's story is one of thousands, most unrecorded, most forgotten. Slaves who poisoned masters, who set fires, who killed overseers, who ran, who fought. These stories were suppressed, erased, hidden, because they contradicted the myth of the happy slave, the contented servant, the natural order. Jane proved there was no natural order, only force, and when force is met with force, blood flows. This story took place 180 years ago. Jane died 137 years ago. Grace died 179 years ago. But the echoes remain: mass incarceration, police brutality, systemic racism, economic oppression. The chains changed form, but they never fully disappeared. Jane's story reminds us that oppression has consequences, that patience has limits, that people will eventually fight back. It reminds us that the good old days some people long for were hell for others. It reminds us that history is written by victors, but truth survives in whispers, in hidden journals, in stories passed down. Jane was not a hero in the traditional sense. She was a woman broken by an evil system who broke back as hard as she could. 24 people died. Grace died anyway. Samuel died in slavery. Jane lived in freedom but not peace. No one won. That's the truth of slavery. Everyone lost. Everyone was damaged. Everyone carried scars. The difference is, some scars were legal and some were not. Some scars made you property and some made you owner. Jane tried to balance that equation with poison. It didn't work. Justice delayed too long is justice denied. Grace was already gone. But Jane's story survives, and surviving is a form of resistance. We tell it now. We remember Jane. We remember Grace. We remember Samuel. We remember the 12 masters too as cautionary figures. We remember that systems of oppression always eventually produce resistance, and resistance, when given no other outlet, becomes violence. This was Jane's story, one of thousands, buried, forgotten, erased, but not gone, never gone. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that history is more complex than textbooks teach, leave your like. In the comments, tell me, was Jane's revenge justified? What would you have done in her position? Do you know other stories of slave resistance? Share this video, subscribe to this channel, ring the bell. These stories matter. They show the full truth of history, not sanitized, not comfortable, real. Jane killed 12 men. The system killed millions. Remember that. Remember Jane. Remember Grace. Remember that freedom has always been fought for, never given. This is history they tried to erase. We're bringing it back.